Good evening, everyone. Warm greetings to each and everyone present. I am Jemima and I will be your host for the evening. On behalf of Department of Social Work, Madras Christian College, and Center for International Social Work, I welcome you all for the 2 days international webinar on growing global interdependence in international social work. This webinar is an initiative of the International Social Work Elective Students of Department of Social Work, aided Madras Christian College. Madras Christian College is an 183-old institution founded by Scottish missionaries in the year 1837. Academic excellence, spiritual vitality, and social relevance has remained the guiding principle of the institution down the decades. The Center of International Social Work, CSW, of Madras Christian College was established in the year 2007 and with the aim to promote social culture, cross-social culture, student and faculty exchange, established a course on international social work and encouraged multilateral collaborative research with the international partners. CSW has hosted different universities across the globe. In this new world, where a global pandemic is bringing into the focus the interdependence of societies and conversation which necessarily have a global perspective. So this webinar is organized to impact knowledge and enable cross-cultural competency by exploring international social work practice and strategies, rising global interdependence. For this international webinar, we are privileged to have speakers from different countries and participants across the globe. I hope that this webinar will broaden your views on global interdependence. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box both in the Zoom and YouTube channel. We will now begin the inaugural function of this 2-day international webinar on growing global interdependence in international social work. The welcome address will be given by Dr. Miriam Samuel, Head of the Department of Social Work, Madras Christian College. Dr. Miriam has been the head of the department since 1993. She is an expert in the areas of curriculum development of social work and conducted various gender training programs, mental health programs for different groups. Ma'am has been a pillar of strength and encouragement to the department and the students since its beginning. I request you, ma'am, to give the welcome address.
Thank you so much, Jemima, for those words of introduction and welcome. Warm greetings to all the special guests, special invitees, speakers, participants, and my own colleagues and students from the Department of Social Work at Madras Christian College. It indeed is a very special moment for me and my colleagues and my students to warmly welcome you all to this international webinar on growing global interdependence in international social work. We have with us many of our friends on the webinar today, and I'm so very happy to see you all here, and I very warmly welcome you all and all the participants to the webinar. We are in challenging times with the pandemic that is taking place right now at the global level and at all places across the globe. Little did we realize, even in India, way back in December, that we would be in this position right now. With schools and institutions closed over the last 10 months, we've been grappling with this new normal and seeing in what best ways we as a social work institution can respond to this growing challenge of this pandemic and the new normal that we're all faced with. This morning, I was doing a session with a group of students, about 1,000 students from an engineering college, and I spoke to them about Zooming through COVID. And I think this is exactly what we are doing. Zoom was a word that we were not familiar with, but today we are on all these platforms. And in a way, the pandemic, with all its challenges, has also brought a lot of growth, a lot of development, a lot of learning, a lot of professionalism for all of us in the field of social work. This global pandemic has given rise to innovative practices, strong bonds across boundaries, nations and countries, cohesiveness, a sense of community resilience. What better way to stand in solidarity as social workers as we respond to this challenge of COVID-19 pandemic? Not just in terms of a public health issue, but I think it's gone beyond being just a public health issue. and we're really looking at ways in which we as social workers can aptly respond to this particular situation. As you heard Jemima introduce, the college is 183 years old, founded and guided by the principles of excellence, academic excellence, social relevance, and spiritual vitality. And these shape our endeavors both at the college and at the department level. Aligning with the principles of social relevance, the college and the department from its inception has constantly responded to the changing times that are there around us. And the COVID-19 is one such instance that we have here. The department today is ranked among the top 10 colleges in India. We were ranked 7th in India today by India Today, which is one of the ranking systems that we have in our country. A small beginning, a small department, but grounded very strongly in the guiding principles of the college and standing up for justice and rights for all our people and communities. We have over the years built our international partners, and today's webinar is an outcome of this international work that we've been doing. And Dr. Julie has been part of our journey over the last many years. And therefore, it is a great privilege for me to welcome Dr. Julie, professor from the University of Calgary, Canada, who is not just a partner in terms of professional terms with the Center for International Social Work, but more so a colleague and a very, very dear friend of mine and all of us at the department. So I'm so glad that she agreed to be here to give the opening remarks and the inaugural address. And Julie, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to see you and really look forward to listening to you this evening for us at India. We also have other colleagues. We have Dr. Jude Gonzalez, who was a colleague of mine at Madras Christian College and now in the US. Thank you so much, Jude, for joining us. He's right now at the university in a college in Massachusetts, and we're so happy that here he's with us. We also have colleagues from the University of Michigan, the School of Social Work. I see Dr. Odis here, and I think Dr. Caitlin will also be joining us. I'm so glad that you both could join us. And we have a partnership with the University of Michigan. And we also really look forward to Prince Solomon being there, hopefully, if all things work well in August 2021, to be exchange faculty with the University of Michigan School of Social Work. So warm welcome to you all also from the University of Michigan School of Social Work. A very warm welcome to all the participants here. I know I can see on the Zoom platform 131 participants. We also have opened up the links on YouTube, and I'm sure there are more participants there on YouTube. Tomorrow also will be an exciting day with our partners from University of Houston, partners from Liverpool Hope University, a panel with our exchange students, both from MCC and from the other universities that we have a partnership with, and a very exciting closing ceremony with the president of IASSW, Dr. Anna Maria, with us tomorrow evening. So dear friends, we really look forward to this evening. For us in India, morning for a lot of you who are here with us, especially Julie, Jude, and our friends from University of Michigan. I know it's in the morning, quite early in the morning, but we are so grateful that you agreed our invitation and agreed to be with us here this morning. To the participants, we do hope that this will be a time of learning because we are at a time where there is a lot of interdependence that is taking place. Social workers can no longer work in isolation wherever we are placed. And this growing interdependence is what we're going to be talking about this evening and over tomorrow's session. So warm welcome to all of you. And we really do hope you have a good time of interaction and learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your kind words. Like Miriam ma'am has mentioned, for the inaugural address, we have with us Dr. Julie Droy, a professor of international social work from the University of Calgary, Edmonton. She is also the project director of Transforming Field Education Landscape, TFAL Partnership. Dr. Julie has over 20 years of experience in international social work practice and research with focus on disaster recovery and climate change, immigrant settlement and integration, and social work field education. She is actively involved in student research training and mentorship, as well as knowledge mobilization initiatives. We are happy to have you in our midst, ma'am. Over to you for the inaugural address on scope and importance of international social work.
Well, thank you very much for this wonderful introduction and welcome to your international webinar on global interdependence. It's a real honor and a pleasure for me to join you today from winter in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And I would like to thank you very much for the invitation. I wish to send my greetings to colleagues and staff in the Department of Social Work at Madras Christian College. I was present in 2007 for the launch of the Center for International Social Work at MCC, and it's always stayed in my heart as a place where we can continue to come together and have these very critical conversations about the role of international social work in our societies today. I have prepared a PowerPoint, and so maybe I could start by sharing the screen now, if that's all right. So if you just give me a moment, I will share my screen and bring this up. I hope that everyone is able to view the screen. Yes? Okay,
yes,
thank
yes,
you.
Julie.
All right, thank you very much. So I've been asked today to speak about the scope and importance of international social work, and keeping in mind the overall theme of your conference, looking at interdependence. I think this topic continues to be very relevant today, particularly during these unprecedented circumstances and times. There is a greater need for all of us to work together to address some of the crises that our world is facing, such as the pandemic. Before I begin today, I would like to offer a territorial acknowledgement. The University of Calgary respectfully acknowledges that we are located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continues to influence our vibrant community. And as many of us are gathered today internationally, I respectfully acknowledge that we are all located on diverse traditional territories in different parts of the earth. I would like to thank Jemima for that lovely introduction and provide here a bit more information about my background. I identify as a professor of international social work. This has really been my area of practice now for over 20 years. I'm actively involved in a number of research projects looking at long-term disaster recovery, immigrant settlement and integration in the Canadian context, social protection and social policies, research on international social work itself, and also field education. And I'll be touching upon some of these various research interests throughout my presentation today. As I mentioned, my connection to the Department of Social Work at Madras Christian College date back quite some time. And it was actually at MCC where my interest in disaster research first began, which was a few years after the Asian tsunami. And Miriam at that time had gathered us together to launch the Center for International Social Work, and we discussed a possible research agenda, and the impacts of the tsunami were discussed, and we created a partnership where data was collected and to learn and to better understand what were some of the experiences of diverse communities in that recovery context. And that has really influenced my work and my thinking over the last decade, where I've now begun to look at disaster research here in the context of Alberta as well, where we've experienced some devastating floods and wildfires wildfires related to the impacts of climate change. So again, a very important connection with the Department of Social Work at Madras Christian College. So today in my presentation, I would like to discuss the context of where we situate ourselves and our backgrounds as we think about international social work. I'd like to touch upon some of the new challenges and new directions that we are facing today in our global world. I'd like to share with you some insights into the Transforming the Field Education Landscape project. And we'll conclude my presentation today with some time for any questions or comments from the audience and the participants today. So as some of you may know, the 2020 to 2030 global agenda for social work and social development has now concluded its consultation process, where our 3 international social work agencies, which are the International Association of Schools of Social Work, the International Federation of Social Work, and the International Council on Social Welfare, have come together and have identified a new global theme, which is co-building inclusive social transformation. And the first theme has now officially been launched for the first 2 years, which is Ubuntu, Strengthening Social Solidarity and Global Connectedness. So I would like to refer to this because this is part of our transformative agenda moving forward to guide social work education programs and social work practice over the next 10 years. And it's a reminder for us to think about how we can co-build inclusive social transformation, think about those critical areas of importance for us in social work practice, in policy, and I would also say in field education, which is an area that hasn't always been given perhaps the attention that it needs. So I'd like to touch upon that a little bit later. It also speaks to Ubuntu, which is an approach that was developed by Nelson Mandela and others in South Africa, which is about bringing together, establishing connections within communities. And so the importance of strengthening social solidarity and global connectedness is an important theme for us, particularly during these challenging times. So I'd like to set this out as part of the context in which we're operating today. And this new global agenda builds on the previous decade, which also identified priority areas in relation to promoting social and economic inequalities, ensuring the dignity and worth of the person, promoting issues related to the natural and physical environment and sustainable communities, thinking about well-being through sustainable human relationships, and also ensuring an appropriate environment for practice and education. So over the past 10 years, a lot of work has been done. International conferences biannually have come together to discuss and explore these priority areas and what actions are being undertaken by social workers and schools of social work in these areas. And I think we can see that it's been largely successful. There's certainly more work to be done in these areas, but by identifying these as thematic areas, people have been able to gather, to undertake new research, to collect new information, and to think about how these areas critically inform our work today. In terms of our background and context, when we think about some of the local and global challenges that we are experiencing, it's very important to remember that international social workers must have a general understanding of the major global challenges to be effective. And it's important to have this knowledge at a global level, which also affects what we engage in locally in our social work practice. There are many local and global challenges facing the world today, and this is a short list of some of the issues that we are all experiencing: poverty and social exclusion throughout the world, environmental issues that challenge us, such as the impacts of climate change and related disasters taking place around the world, and in relation to that, the sustainable development challenges that emerge from them. When we think about diverse health and mental health issues, thinking about specific populations that may be experiencing challenges, migrant populations, including forced migration and refugees, Indigenous populations, which require us to think about how we can adopt anti-colonial and decolonizing practices in our work. And also the rise of aging populations as our world becomes is aging and becomes older, and thinking about how do we deliver services across multiple generations. Issues related to child welfare and child protection continue to play an important role in social work, as well as issues related to families. So these are only some of the local and global challenges that we experience, which manifest differently in different parts of the world. In relation to addressing some of these challenges, many of you are familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals that have been identified by the United Nations to focus in and address various deliverables between now and 2030. So the SDGs also overlap with our new global agenda over the coming decade. So we need to think about what is our role as social workers in advancing all of these sustainable development goals? Because I certainly believe that we have a role to play in all 17 of them, from working towards no poverty, to reducing inequalities, to taking on climate action, and also developing partnerships so that we can achieve goals together and work together in solidarity. So I'd now like to turn to international social work, which is in itself a critical field of practice for us. There have been many definitions of social work across national and international boundaries for many years, and it is sometimes one of our greatest challenges as social work educators to really define what we mean by social work, given the need to adapt and shift to these new and emerging realities. Social work in today's economic and social climate differs from the social work that was practiced decades ago. And this is because we are adapting to these new realities and challenges that are emerging. Many social workers share similar professional values and work from a shared theory base, which has been informed by many social science theories in years past. And social workers also work to address inequality and injustice across a range of different settings and roles and foci. And despite some differences in the way social work is practiced, experienced, and even articulated, it does have a clear identity. And I now like to refer to some of these key definitions. So many of us are familiar with the global definition of social work that was put forward by our International Federation of Social Workers in 2014. And I'd like to take a moment to read this, because I think it does help us set the stage for thinking about our discussion today on international social work. Social work is a practice-based profession and an academic discipline that promotes social change and social development, social cohesion, and the empowerment and liberation of people. Principles of social justice, human rights, collective responsibility, and respect for diversities are central to social work. Underpinned by theories of social work, social sciences, humanities, and Indigenous knowledge, social work engages people and structures to address life challenges and enhance well-being. The above definition may be amplified at national and/or regional levels. So what this tells us is that social work has a very strong practice component. It's also an academic discipline that integrates a number of theories that inform our practice. Research is also a critical role of social work in developing new knowledges to address various life challenges and enhance people's well-being. And as mentioned, this definition can be amplified, strengthened, focused on the local context in which social work operates at those various levels. We also have a global social work statement of ethical principles, and I would just like to remind us of a couple of points. Ethical principles of social justice, human rights, collective responsibility, and respect for diversities are central to social work. And this is actually what differentiates us from many other professions. And this relates to our social work ethics and our values and principles. So it's important for us to remember that we are driven to strive for social justice, to promote human rights, and to think collectively and to provide that respect for diversities. Many of our social work theories build upon a foundation in the social sciences, humanities, and Indigenous knowledges. So it's important for us to also be mindful of our history and also our work, which involves challenging discrimination, oppression, and unjust policies and practices, is also a call for us to think about these processes of change and transformation. And I think we see this reflected in our current 2-year focus in thinking about social solidarities and transformation. I'd like to share this quote because I think it touches upon some important dimensions of international social work. And it was coined by Ruth Stark, who is quite involved in the IFSW. Social work is a dynamic profession. It interacts with people and their environments, physical, emotional, and psychological. Change happens all around us all the time. How we adapt and how we work with that change will make the difference between inclusive, sustainable community development, and fragmentation, conflict, and the abuse of power and control. The work of social workers throughout the world is complex. The need for clear analytical thinkers is key to good social work practice. A high-level educational attainment is critical to social work professionals. And I think what this reminds us of is the importance, the value of social work. I really commend the students for organizing this international webinar to create a space for us to come together and have these conversations, because the way that we are able to adapt and thrive during this pandemic is also a testament to us as social workers in thinking about how we can now leverage some technologies to inform our work. There are certainly new challenges and new directions. The social work profession struggles with understanding, adapting to, and sometimes challenging environments in which we practice. Undertaking this anti-oppressive work is not always easy. There is a need for social work approaches that go beyond individual and family level problems and solutions, especially in times of societal crisis. And I would argue that we are currently living through one today. When we think about our social work practice, it is inclusive of a holistic approach that includes the micro, meso, and macro level interventions. Critical social workers are committed to understanding, critiquing, and transforming the profession of social work and the unjust nature of society. And we certainly see that today with the COVID-19 global pandemic, which has shone a light on many of the injustices and challenges being experienced in our societies. Here in Canada, we're currently in our second wave of the pandemic. And so many of us are working from home. Our social work education programs are fully online, and we've had to adapt to this new reality. And it's taken its toll. It's not easy. Many of the supports that we've come to know, the people that we work with, we've had to adapt and find ways to engage in this work in online, virtual, and remote environments. At the same time, it is said that we're all in this together, but we do not experience this pandemic in the same way. And it has brought to light many of the vulnerabilities, population groups that are experiencing diverse forms of injustice, and the impacts are experienced differently. And I would say that this is similar to some of our disaster research work that we have done together with Madras Christian College Department of Social Work, that we need to think about people's human rights. We need to think about how we can promote justice and equity during this time of pandemic. Similar to a disaster, we're also looking to build and foster resilience at the individual and community level. So I think that there are some important lessons that we can draw from other disasters and crises and humanitarian emergencies, and think about how we might be able to work with some of those lessons learned and adapt them to the current pandemic that we're all going through. So when we think about international social work, we all have a role to play in thinking about this current pandemic, both locally in our communities, but also globally, in terms of how this pandemic is affecting us at various structural levels. I'd now like to touch upon the important role of the environment in global social work. We mentioned earlier the Sustainable Development Goals by the United Nations, which really focus and challenge us on how to achieve a more sustainable, inclusive world, which is relevant for our work in social work. Our emphasis on social well-being and equality is also connected to the economics and ecological dimensions of sustainability. In a lot of my work, I adopt a social development approach that looks to better integrate the social, economic, and environmental dimensions in social work. And this often plays out in terms of our community practices and the work that we undertake. Earlier this year, I co-edited a new book with Dr. Sarah Todd at Carleton University in Canada, with 24 chapters looking at community practice and social development, specifically in social work. So this publication was launched a few months ago and is available on the Springer Nature website, and some of the chapters have been made available open access. And so in this, we look at some of the issues related to the environment, sustainability, and that social development lens. There have been a number of terms used in social work, such as eco-social, ecological, green social work, and environmental social work. And many of these terms have been used interchangeably now in various global social work contexts. Some of the references are there. The IFSW has also published some open access workbooks, which are available on their website, which also trace and outline some of these different approaches in our field. And I would like to touch upon this aspect of interdependence, which is a key theme for your international webinar over these next 2 days. With environmental degradation, researchers have been arguing that human and environmental welfare are inextricably linked, or what I would argue are interdependent. Thus, we need to move towards sustainability, protecting the environment, and fostering sustainable development. And it was one of my colleagues at the University of Calgary, Kim Zaff's work on social work and the environment that reminds me of these important connections and linkages. And so as we think about global interdependence, I think it's important for us to remember the role of our natural and physical environment in those aspects. And I think really when we think about how do we work together to address these challenges, at the same time, we need to be willing to have courageous conversations. We need to be thoughtful about how we explore our understandings of power, our privilege, and oppression, and the diversity inherent in socioculturally diverse groups. It's important for us to think about how we have these conversations in a mindful and thoughtful manner, and to be reflective about our behavior, which is quite critical to thinking about diversity and social justice learning activities. We need to move from safe spaces for these conversations to brave spaces and have these courageous conversations. I'm reminded that learning necessarily involves not merely risk, but the pain of giving up a former condition or a way of thinking in favor of a new way of seeing things. So it's important for us to be open to thinking about these current global challenges, these crises that we find ourselves in, to thinking about how do we transform? How can we learn from this understanding in this new normal, in this new context, to thinking about how can we come out of this better? How can we build back better? And this is not just a physical condition, it's also one that we need to think about within our own social locations. This takes me to the importance of intersectionality, which is, I think, an area that we're seeing emerge more now in international social work, allowing us to really reflect and think about how we identify ourselves. And intersectionality is being used now more and more in social work research, but by its considering the different intersecting social categories, some of which are included here in these bubbles when we think about race and social class and gender, sexuality, disability and ability, nationality and ethnicity. It allows for a holistic understanding of lived experiences of a particular individual within society based on multiple characteristics. And it's applicable to every person or group in our community and in our society. It's often said that we are all the sum of our parts. So when we think about all these different parts, it sometimes doesn't make sense to just look at one of them. We need to think about all of these different intersections, how all of these diverse aspects of our identity intersect and inform who we are. Intersectionality is a way of thinking about ourselves. It's based on a critique of feminist theories that could not fully explain the experiences of African American women in the United States. And over time, it has been adapted and used in different studies. And I've noticed in my work with many students that intersectionality is proving to be a lens that is helpful when we think about social work research, because it allows us to understand privilege and oppression and the various systems of power that produce and create various social inequalities. I'd now like to turn my attention to the Transforming the Field Education Landscape. This is a partnership that's currently in its second year, whose aim is to integrate research and practice in the preparation of the next generation of social workers by developing partnered research training initiatives, both within academia and across the public and non-for-profit sectors, to enhance student and trainee research practice knowledge and applied skill development. And you'll see our logo here at the top, which you'll see in the next few slides here. I wish to acknowledge that the TEFL project is supported in part by SHIRK in Canada. This project emerged because social work field education, which is a critical component of social work education, is facing a number of challenges. This has been documented in Canada in recent years, and I would say that also internationally, many schools have found over the years that it is becoming increasingly difficult to create and support placements for students due to a number of factors, which I won't get into at this time. But to say that a crisis is looming in field education, particularly in Canada, is something that has been documented. And so this partnership was brought together to bring together field educators, field coordinators and directors, faculty members, field supervisors and instructors, and also students to work together in a partnership approach to address this crisis and to transform field education. These are some of our objectives in terms of what we're hoping to achieve in a transforming field education, to develop more sustainable models of field, to transform field by bridging the gap between research and practice, to create new training and mentorship opportunities for students with our partners, to engage in knowledge mobilization and to share and outreach the new resources and understanding that's created through this process. I'd like to just highlight some members of our team, and I know that at the Department of Social Work, that you know some of them from your time in Canada. Our co-investigators, there are 13 of them, come from different parts of the country, from the east to the west. We also have over 50 collaborators in our partnership, also from various schools, many of which are field coordinators and directors. and also a number of partners, Canadian and international partners. And I've highlighted in pink here the Department of Social Work at Madras Christian College, who is also one of our supporters and partners in the TEFL project, building upon some of our earlier experience and work together. Our project is organized into 3 different streams. Stream 1 relates to digital storytelling. Stream 2 is a national study to inform the development of more sustainable field education models. And Stream 3 focuses on applied practice research. And throughout all 3 of these streams, we are creating new training and mentoring activities for students and trainees. I'd like to go into a little more detail on each of the streams. So we're using digital storytelling as a method to engage students in creating their own digital stories, to promote a deeper reflection and to make sense of experience in the social work practicum and also in courses through social work education. And we've had a number of students go through the process where they've been mentored to create their digital stories. And some of these products can be found on our website now. So we've been hosting some workshops and some webinars on digital storytelling. And we currently have a group of, I would say, approximately 25 students who are incorporating and working on digital stories in their field seminar, and has a reflection on their practicum and learning. And our guiding research question is, in what ways does the storytelling process enhance student learning about research training and mentorship? In our second stream, we're undertaking a national study, and it's the students and postdoctoral scholars who are leading these initiatives with mentorship from faculty and partners. A number of activities are being undertaken. A survey on the state of social work field education in Canada was completed, and those results were shared in a webinar last week. And the final report is currently being prepared. We've also undertaken 2 surveys on the impacts of COVID on field education from the perspectives of students. And we're currently launching a second survey on to better understand the perspectives of field instructors and supervisors who are supervising students. We're also doing 100 interviews to identify promising, wise, and innovative practices in field education that could be shared and exchanged to address some of the challenges that are being experienced. And so we have students now who are undertaking those interviews across Canada. Another aspect is we've had dialogue circles, which are virtual focus groups with students to also learn about their perspectives and experiences. So a wide range of activities led by students who are collecting new data to inform how we can create more sustainable models of field and exchange these practices within our members, with our partners, but also outreach those findings to others. And our third stream relates to applied practice research. And this is about better facilitating the integration of research and practice in field education. And so we've started to develop some new training modules. We hosted a virtual field summit last July, where some workshops were held virtually online, of course, because of COVID. Those recordings for some of those sessions are available on our website, and I invite you to take a look. We're also looking at field learning agreements and contracts and looking to see how we can better include research activities in those learning agreements for undergraduate and graduate students. We have some researchers who have developed a method called Research as Daily Practice to think about how often the practice work that social workers are engaged in is very similar to the various steps in the research process. So really trying to bridge that divide that often happens between research and practice. And throughout all of this, we're really centering students. So we're aiming to create training and mentoring environments where students can thrive and ask critical questions about the nature of social work and field education. And we're currently conducting a literature review on the evolution of international social work and field practicum to develop a new resource that can better prepare students for international practicum in the future. Knowledge mobilization is an important component for us. So participating in webinars like the one we have today, sharing digital storytelling, creating training resource and modules, students preparing infographics, engaging in social media, contributing new knowledge in published journal articles are all aspects of our project. And I invite you to visit our website at teflproject.com. We're also on Twitter and Facebook to stay informed of our activities. And I believe Dr. Miriam Samuel is connected with our newsletter and some of our resources. So we'd like to extend that invitation to become involved with us. So I would like to thank you very much for your attention today and for listening to me speak. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I do have some time for any questions or comments that anyone may have in relation to this presentation or in relation to our topic on the scope and importance of international social work today. I'll just bring this up. Here is my email address and again, the website for the project. And maybe I'll stop sharing the screen now. Thank you.
Ma'am, we got one question for you, ma'am. International social work leadership license, a suggested idea. Can it be implemented to make it a reality? Ma'am?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I need to turn my sound up on my computer. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Shall I ask the question, ma'am?
Yes, please.
Yeah. The International Social Work Leadership License, a suggestive idea. Can it be implemented to make it a reality?
I'm wondering if someone might be able to provide a bit more information about the leadership license. I'm afraid I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah. Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for sharing about the local and global challenges and also touching some points on environmental scope of interdependence. Yeah, really thank you for sharing your experience with us, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes,
just a minute, Jemima. I think Dr. Julie, Dr. Anna Maria was also, I think, listening to you. And then she was saying that it is important for us to recognize that the educators and practitioners came together with the IFSW and the IASW to form the definition for social work. So she had put a comment on the chat box with regard to that.
Okay, thank you. I haven't looked at the chat, so thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, ma'am. So before we move on to the session, I would like to give some few instructions to the participants. Please ensure that your audio and video is muted. For those using Zoom, please post your question in question and answer box and in YouTube, the chat box. It will be answered at the end of the session. An attendance link will be shared at the end of the session on each day in both Zoom and YouTube link. Kindly fill them. The certificate will be provided only to the participants who attended both the days of the webinar. Now we are into the main session for first day of webinar. The first speaker of the day is Dr. Jude Gunnar. He is working as the Assistant Dean and Associate Professor in Regis College, United States, dealing with the subject of social work and public administration. He is also involved in planning, curriculum management, project management, program management, faculty hiring, and so on in Regis College. He is a member of the International Federation of Social Workers, Council of Social Work Education, and National Association of Social Workers. We are proud to say that he was the faculty of Department of Social Work at Madras College from 1990 to 2000. We are glad to have you with us today, sir. Over to you, sir, for the session on environment, health, economic, and security independence. Thank you.
Thank you, Jemima. a warm welcome, and thank you, Dr. Miriam Samuel. Thank you, Dr. Prince Solomon, for inviting me to do this presentation. I should really be happy right now to talk to you guys because it's been over 2 decades since I left MCC. I was there for a decade. I've had many students under me, and I'm really thrilled to be part of this 2-day workshop, 2-day webinar. Um, so I'm going to try and share my screen so we can all be on the same page as to what. Okay, here we go. All right. Oops. So I think you all can see my screen, right? Is it?
Yes, we can see, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right, thank you. So, when I got this invitation just a week back, I was like in this kind of pandemic mode, pandemic mode, everything inside me, which was like a sense of trauma. It was a sense of trauma trying to administer the programs at the college and trying to get things done. But I've never said no to my dear student, Prince Solomon. Whenever he requests me something, I always try to be accommodative. And I said, okay, I'll give it a try. And he sent me this topic, which is basically quite interesting, but at the same time, oops, I don't know why my screen is not moving. Okay, yeah, there you go. So, it was a kind of a topic that he had asked me to talk about, which is the economic interdependence, the social interdependence, the environmental interdependence, and the security interdependence. And I was like, okay, this is not easy, right? However, to integrate this into international social work is much more easier than said. And hence I said, okay, I'll give it a try. And I did, So whatever you hear from me is based on my understanding of the economic independence, which is based on a concept called globalization. Globalization, if you realize, it is time. When you go back to time, it is much more ancient than human existence itself. We've always been migrants. We've always been moving from one side to the other, one end to the other. And we've always moved because, in a way, the world itself has been interdependent for its existence. So globalization basically is a word used to describe the growing interdependence of the world's economies, cultures, and populations brought about by cross-border trade in goods and services, technology, and flows of investment, people, and information. This is very critical in understanding the interdependence. We've got so many things in our lives that at times we do not realize we are always going to be dependent on somebody else. When you look at the economic interdependence, one of those things is, it goes back to my days when I was in high school and I was in an economics class where the syllabus given out included globalization. And it was another extra chapter in the high school that we had to study, and it was so difficult to comprehend it. But today, when you look back in this present state of the pandemic, we understand what that means, economic interdependence. And at that time, I only remember these different organizations which came into play: IMF, United Nations, the World Bank, and to a certain extent, I understood the World Trade Organization. NATO is much more recent, but when I was in class at that time, I was wondering why we are studying this, why we asked to learn about it. But 30 years later, it is important to understand how we are going to function in society and how we are going to help the common individuals we are always going to interact. So the first thing I wanted to say is economic interdependence is when people rely on others to provide the goods and services required for supporting their lives or for convenience. So here is a concept that, it could be, okay, I need something for today's living, so can I borrow it from my neighbor or my neighbors around the place where I'm living? And in return, maybe I would exchange what I have in surplus. So it's an exchange kind of a trade at the local level, but at the macro level, when you come to understand this, it is much more larger where countries get involved for exchange of goods. Today, the United States, I am in the United States. The factories are all closed. It's not, I'm talking about before the pandemic as well. There have been goods are not manufactured in the United States. There's very little goods being manufactured in the United States. We rely a lot on trade with other countries, particularly China. So there is a kind of trade agreement between China and the United States. And this drives the way in which the United States works on it. So in my opinion, the United States is living on the labor of other countries. And in exchange, they have surplus wealth to give, and we get it at a desirable price. So that's the exchange level under which countries try to trade at the economic level. Something which comes to my mind while I was watching one of the news channels was a story of a Bangladesh entrepreneur who was running an export garment company, and he was interviewed by this reporter over a 60-minute interview, and he showed the viewers, the audience, how his factory has been impacted because of the pandemic. His entire factory is closed. The workers are sent home. They do not have wages, or at least he is trying to provide them some wages, irrespective of them coming to work. But on the other hand, his entire factory has surplus raw material from India, China, various other countries with, which he needed to export these particular products which he was manufacturing, and most of them were garments to the United Kingdom. These garments, now the purchasers, on the other hand, who are also impacted by the pandemic, have withdrawn their contract. Here comes our international social work role. We got to think out of the box. We got to critically think, how are we going to help these people workers? There are many issues around this. It's not just economic interdependency. It is also the psychological dependence, the psychological needs that an individual needs to overcome the pandemic. While there is an economic interdependence being denied, how are we going to help this entrepreneur? How are we going to help these workers who have now been laid off? These are some questions that come up around the concept of economic interdependence, and we cannot treat it by isolation. You cannot isolate this particular, this is only economic needs. No, the economic needs are tied into psychological, social, and physical needs in the individual, in the community, in the globe as well. So globalization has created a need for trading network. What is this trading network? The trading network is the ones who determine how much is going to be given in exchange for services or goods. So if we get it at a bargain rate, then the trading network will say, this is what we do. They would levy tariffs and things like that. Something that recently is happening is Saudi Arabia trying to bring, sell their oil in the open market through bidders. So that's another kind of economic interdependence. Saudi Arabia, as you know, is rich in terms of oil, and they have a surplus amount of oil. But on the other hand, they're trying to find a constant and consistent way in which they could trade this oil as a commodity. And how is this impacting their own country and the other countries is what we need to know. And how are we as social workers going to help an individual in those situations? The next thing is environmental interdependence that I think this is much more something we are much more familiar with as social workers at every level, at the local level, at the community level, at the international level as well. But on the other hand, what really is the environment? It's our life support system. The environment is our life support system. If you think of the environment post-pandemic and how it is going to be when we start again getting back on the roads, United States, I would say we are the most highly polluted country in this world, in the sense we drive a car where we can accommodate 4 others, but we drive it by ourselves, we drive ourselves by ourselves. And on the other hand, every individual is driving a car, but on the other hand, we're also polluting the environment. So environmental problems is a concern of one country and is also a concern of another country or the neighboring country, or in fact, the whole world. We should remember this, because if we are polluting the environment in our own neighborhood, it is always going to be something we are going to contribute to the world at large. Most early conservation methods and environmental concerns were essentially local in nature, like a factory. I remember watching the Tamil news and the issues in Tuticorin over the factory, which was, polluting the environment there. That's an example of real, kind of a local level intervention where social workers can play an important role by being an advocate, trying to, educate the community and work with them in terms of helping them create a better environment. Some of the other things are, whenever you visit my own state, Kerala, which is my own God's country, you would find the environment very conducive. However, it is not very conducive to the largest extent. There are pollutants happening in the local river around Periyar, the Periyar River, and we have to remember that it is good as long as we try to keep on protecting it and ensuring it. The United States, we face a lot of issues around climate change, energy, species conservation, invasive species, deforestation, mining, nuclear accidents, pesticide pollution, waste and overpopulation. Despite taking hundreds of measures, like we do have environmental experts, and also we have social workers who also work at various levels with regard to that, around the maintenance and improving environmental conditions. But at the same time, pollution movements can be a simple matter, but on the other hand, it can be very difficult to implement. There's always, if you want to work around a factory which is polluting the neighborhood or the environment, there are various things that we have to remember, which I would like to, kind of include in this presentation. The political interdependence. It's lost in a social worker's map, because we don't think that political parties also play a major role. And here also, I think social workers at the international level and at the national and local level can start working to, kind of influence political parties or politicians into making policies that are very conducive to protecting the environment. Let me go into the next topic, which is actually I'm continuing on this, the environment. One of those things is most of us feel the environment is only for human beings. Actually, the environment is for everybody. This world is for everybody. Animals, birds, in March or April, when there was a total lockdown in many countries, the environment around the world improved. Birds started coming out.
Please
Birds
mute, Ma.
started coming out. All the wild animals had, realized this world is also for them. So in a way, I think the pandemic has done us a good thing to realize that, it's not only for the human beings, this world is also for animals, the wild animals, and as long as they are there, it's good. One of the other things I would like to draw your attention is the ocean fisheries, which are happening in the Southeast Asian world. And we do get a lot of fish from that part of the world, but they are overfishing over there because their only livelihood is fishing. But on the other hand, they also realize exporting that brings in a little more than what they could probably get. So we come to the major kind of an important thing, which is health interdependence. At the local level, every aspect of environment is contributing to the health of an individual. Our neighborhood, our communities, as long as they are clean and neat and not polluting the environment, less and health issues will be prevalent from chemical causing cancer, respiratory health problems, communicable diseases like the most recent SARS-2, also known as COVID-19, Ebola, flu, bird flu. All of these are things that are very interdependent on the previous two topics, which I said: economic interdependence, environmental interdependence. And to address the health issues, we need to come together. And something that kind of comes to my mind is that health interdependence is critical. And if in the present situation, we are racing towards finding a vaccine in the United States, we have two pharmaceutical companies, almost 95% there to provide us with a vaccine. And China is also developing a vaccine. India is also developing a vaccine with at least 98% success rate. The trial samples have always been positive. The initial tests were a little negative, but they have moved forward. The question here to me is, where are they getting this money? These pharmaceutical companies, they are getting it from the economically wealthy countries who have put in money into health insurances, and now the entire world is worried about this particular COVID, coronavirus, killing millions of people across the world, and hence they're trying to find a vaccine. But the other question as social workers we have to remember is the vaccine, if it is found, it's a process of or a production. But on the other hand, how much or how many vaccines can be produced, the quantity for the world needed. And on the other hand, how are we going to get the entire world vaccinated? We're going to have a queue of individuals lining up. We're going to have a queue of countries saying we need to get it first. Countries are going to bid and ask for the vaccine at a high cost. And it's going to be a little difficult to address the vaccine and how we vaccinate the entire world. Unless the entire world is vaccinated against this disease, we cannot be living in comfort or in peace. So the health interdependence is one of those major things. We have to constantly think, how are we going to work with our communities? How are we going to, along with the other two, which I've talked about. The next one I would like to talk about is security interdependence, which is safety of each and every creation in this world. How is an animal in this world safe So that is the security. What is the security do we give? What security do we give animals? What security do we give human beings? What security do we give every creature in this world who was created by the God as a creation of his own? And this is a security kind of a concern when you talk about COVID, when you talk about environmental issues, when you talk about economic issues, health issues. All of these boil down to security interdependence. And the security interdependence, again, is something which comes to my mind is win as much as you can, kind of a concept where it doesn't mean win as much as you can, means selfish kind of gains, but win as much as you can, which is all of us can, and share it. That the meaning is to share that entire resources available. So we have many systems to maintain the safety of the planet. But on the other hand, I would like to quote something from President Roosevelt on the topic around what we've been discussing, which is environmental and economic interdependence. Along with that, other issues which we have raised here, which is the health interdependence and the security interdependence. So President Roosevelt in 1948 said, "I saw that you could not separate the idea of commerce from the idea of war and peace, and that wars are largely caused by economies that rivalry conduct unfairly practices. I embrace the philosophy that unhampered trade dovetailed with peace, high tariffs, trade barriers, and unfair economic competitors with war. If we could get a free flow of trade, freer to the sense of a fewer discrimination and obstructions, so that our country would not be deadly jealous of another and their living standards." This sums up, the way in which President Roosevelt looked at the entire globalization process and the way in which the United States was relying on other countries for trade and for services. So the US is rich in services, however, they're low in goods, and they were relying on other countries for goods. And this is something that comes to my mind in terms of what are we going to do? Where are we in this world? At times we wonder whether this world is really a good place or not. But I'm of the belief, yes, the world is good. We do have problems. We do have many problems, but I just want to show you one YouTube video of a challenging situation, which, let me pull that up, which one of a person who was really in a very bad condition comes up with, I gotta get this. So let me skip this ads, I'm sorry.
So, excuse me, sir. So, sir, sir, excuse me, sir. Sir? Sir?
Yes, Jemima, you can speak louder. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Sir, as we are exceeding the time, so can we watch that video later
Can we
at the
put?
end of?
We can post
Yeah.
it in the. We can post it in the chat actually.
Yes, sir. So we would like you to conclude your topic, sir.
Yeah, I'm gonna just finish with this and then.
So we can put the video in the chat box so that others can use it.
Okay.
So we would like you to conclude your topic, sir. So because we are exceeding the time, sir. So now can we move on to the next speaker?
Yes, I'm gonna stop this. Where is this? Oops. Hello. Yes, Jemima.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes,
I
sir.
am actually done with my presentation. That's the only one that I wanted to show. I would like to tell the audience that war is no solution to any problem in this world. It is peace that brings solutions. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. And also thank you for enlightening the points on health, economic and security interdependence with an interesting examples. So we would like you to post that video in the chat so that people can use it, sir. So the participants can see it later, sir.
Sure. I think
Yes, thank
somebody
you,
has
sir.
already posted it.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, one of
Yes,
them
sir.
is. All right. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. So now let's
Question.
move to the second. So questions will
You can
be
answer
asked
the
in the end of the
questions
session.
later. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So let's move on to the second speaker of the day, Dr. Odisha Gonzalez Benson, who is the assistant professor at the University of Michigan School of Social Work. Our areas of research are refugee settlements, refugee migrant-led organizations, participatory approaches to urban governance and social service with refugees, state civil society relations and critical policy studies. Dr. Benson pursues interdisciplinary work integrating social welfare and community perspectives with refugee studies and urban studies, particularly within the context of new refugee destinations such as Michigan and the border Midwest. Ma'am, ma'am will be focusing on the topic of social welfare interdependence and cultural independence. Over to you, ma'am.
Okay.
Ma'am.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So, thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very delighted to be engaging with you in your university and with all the students. So I will share my screen. You can see, hopefully.
Yes.
So my talk today is a comparative analysis of state contracted and grassroots organizations in the US refugee resettlement policy domain. And so I just wanted to kind of frame this around interdependence. And so I think my talk is a little bit different from the two speakers ahead of us. And so it's kind of seeing this presentation as providing a structural analysis or a systemic analysis in this particular case of refugee resettlement policy, to be able to illustrate a nuanced understanding of organizations, to be able to make a call or argue for interdependence. So it's kind of backtracking a little bit or seeing the background to how we can rationalize, argue for or rationalize this in their interdependence. And so in this case, it's specifically between social work professional organizations and community-based groups, right? As you'll see in the conclusion, the interdependence is really in the implications of this study or this research. But also, so in this particular case, it's refugee resettlement domain in the US, but the structural analysis can apply to other domains. So we can see how, policy and structures and systems are kind of warranting interdependence amongst organizations and social work. And I will go a little bit, I do have a lot of, not a lot, but some slides. So as background or premise is US refugee resettlement policy in these 4 dimensions. So this is kind of how we can characterize refugee policy in the US. So there's different ways to think of it, but this is what I'm using for this analysis or study, is that the US Refugee Act or US policy on refugee resettlement is economics focused. So I think, that most people probably think that integration or, adjustment of refugees is the goal, but actually in policy, it's self-sufficiency or work. And that is kind of like the only goal. So they will assist with integration insofar as it can promote work, right? And so it's very economics focused and it's managerial. So it means that refugee policy provides some prescriptions on how resettlement agencies and social workers should help refugees. So it's very managerial is the term. And the evolution of authority, this means that around the 80s or 90s, the US institutions restructured so that rather than public agencies providing services for refugees, it became private nonprofit organizations. So it's also related to the next point about privatization. So rather than public agencies, it became nonprofit NGOs who provide resettlement services. So there is a big shift. And so with that shift, we have 2 kinds of organizations. On the left are, we're calling resettlement NGOs. So we have 9 in the US. They're nationally based, they're well established. They've been providing resettlement assistance, since the World War II. So they're very big. They have annual federal funding. So we're calling them state contracted. And then there's a lot of, and then refugee run organizations are, run by refugees. They're grassroots, very new. Many are still kind of building organizational capacity, and usually many are not registered as an official organization. They have no or minimal funding. And so we're kind of calling them a state detached because they don't prescribe to refugee policy and they don't have funding from the federal government. And so there's been a lot of literature on the left side on resettlement NGOs. And that's what we'll be drawing on for the comparative analysis. But for this study, so I'm going to be showing some data about RCOs. And then we can make this comparison using literature and empirical data. And so the case study are Bhutanese refugees, and maybe it's your neighbor up north. So most people think down here, usually I explain this background in the US, but perhaps you're familiar with the Bhutanese refugees or with Bhutan. So usually it's considered this Himalayan state, the gross national happiness is there and this great policy. But most people are not aware that there was this ethno-religious persecution of a minority group in Bhutan around the 1990s, right? So 100,000 people were fled due to persecution, and they were in camps in Nepal for 2 decades. And then they started resettlement in the US and, around the world in 2008. What's interesting about this case, which would makes them particularly appropriate for examining organizational life upon resettlement, is that they were hailed as model camps by the United Nations. I'm sorry, I just want, if there's chats or some questions that I should be aware of, maybe the organizers can let me know because I'm not seeing the chat. Okay.
At the end of the session, we will let you know, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, so they were hailed as model camps by the United Nations international community. So while they were in the camps, the UN implemented the CDA approach. It's called Community Development Approach, where they assisted the refugees to manage their own camps. And they had really excellent, literacy rates, education, health. And so they were considered a model case. And also I have years of work with this community. And so that's kind of the case study. So I'm drawing from 40 interviews, 4 focus groups, leaders of Bhutanese refugee organizations in 30 US cities. So usually studies about organizations, studies about immigrant organizations are usually in-depth, like a handful of smaller samples, right? In-depth studies, whereas this one provides a nationwide scope. And then there's some issues there. Just wanted to raise those points about researcher positionality, bias, and there's no analysis of modality of activities and variability, but those are in progress now as next phases of this research. And so there's 2 kinds of findings. I'm checking the time, okay. The first one is basically, it's a reframing of what RCOs do. So usually in the US, when they think about refugee-run organizations, we think of them as cultural groups, this 3rd bullet here, cultural and social events, that they are mainly cultural and social organizations. That's the kind of dominant narrative about RCOs. But with the data and by talking to them and engaging with them and through my social work practice, we see that we can actually, if we consider the substance of what they do, it's very parallel to many of the things social workers do as professionals. Case management, crisis management, they do some outreach, and they have targeted sustained programs. So that means that, they have ESL classes, Nepali classes, they have programming for senior citizens, some have mentorship tutoring for youth. So they're able to do all this, right? And also they do advocacy and liaison. And, I'm gonna back up. But maybe I shouldn't have done that. But remember that they did all that, but they have no funding and they're very grassroots. So their organizational structure is not, very official. There's no infrastructure, but they're able to do these things. So this is just another bigger table that provides more details, but the 5 types of activities are there on the left side. And I can answer more questions about this, and also in a recent publication. And then this is the comparative analysis, where this first bullet here, policy constraints for state contracted NGOs. This column is what you could think about where social workers work. And then this The findings is about RCOs, or refugee-run organizations. And this is a very busy slide, and there's a lot there, but we'll unpack it. So the next 4 slides, we'll talk about each of these rows: when, who, where, and how. And so when, so this is a quote: "Our help is more sustainable, more permanent kind of help as far as there's a need, but the government is for a fixed period of time." So literature shows that state contracted NGOs, where many social workers work, their services are time limited, because it's public funding. So it's usually just 30 days and also 8 months. So remember that jobs is the focus. So job placement and job assistance is 8 months only. And they're expected, refugees, there's an expectation that they will be self-sufficient and working in 8 months only. On the contrary, these refugee-run groups are kind of, it says more sustainable, more permanent. So it is different. The resettlement agency just resettles, gives them a job, finished. After 6 months, finished. After 8 months, finished. But the Bhutanese organization goal is different. We serve them for a long time until they are self-sufficient. The goal is as the community is there. Whether 20 years, 30 years, we are a community and we're responsible to them somehow. So this kind of shows the difference in terms of temporality dimension or time dimension. Okay. Who? People the resettlement agency could not reach. So I'll just go. So the state contracted NGOs prioritize on people who are job ready, meaning these are people who might have work skills, who speak English, have education. On the contrary, because that's the aim of refugee resettlement. So therefore, the refugee groups focus on the ones who are not job ready, right? So it says here, we focus especially on the illiterate people who cannot read the signs, the signboards, and other flyers. So they're focusing on people who have more need, whereas state-funded organizations are beholden to like the policy goals. Where? So there's some literature that says that public agencies are not geographically located where communities are. And on the contrary, the RCO groups do their work within the communities. And also they're driving. Their services are often held in apartment complexes, parks, public libraries, and people's living rooms. How? So as we talked about, there's a lot of literature about how policy constrains or makes services technocratic or instrumental, routinized, discretionary, or so very kind of transactional and just getting the work done. But it's led to a lot of or lack of kind of engagement with the refugees and being person-centered, just because of the numbers and high caseloads and prioritizing like efficiency in these agencies. So on the contrary, these groups are very kind of personal, informal, and very, so they know each other, they share common culture and social network. So it's very, it's different engagement. And sometimes there were 3 to 4 families in my sitting room when I got back to college. So this is this was a 20-year-old man who helping people with their like green cards, I think is the context there. And also it was more ad hoc. So rather than, social work or professionalized services that are scheduled, you do an appointment, you meet them, you have documents. This one's kind of more ad hoc. So they just text them and then they, then they meet the next day or something like that. And so this is again the table from the beginning that kind of summarizes the conceptual framework for this comparative analysis. And hopefully, it's a bit more clear now. And I won't go over this one again. And then there's the last slide, is the concluding discussion. So the theoretical and conceptual concluding discussion relates to the original theorizing about, multi-scalar governance of resettled refugees, and how responsibility and authority was devolved down to nonprofit organizations from the state, or from the public responsibility to resettled refugees. But then the research or study argues that there's a third order devolution onto grassroots RCOs, right? So these community-based groups are not typically considered as institutional actors. They're marginalized. Like I said, they're considered as social or cultural, but so we are making this argument that they have a role in resettlement policy, precisely because of the limits of professionalized social services for refugees. And so, so then we come to the interdependence, or so we can use this policy analysis to kind of argue for interdependence, right? Because these groups do some critical work that professional social services are not able to do because of policy. Then we call for kind of reimagining what interdependence and collaboration might look like for these groups. And so it's warranting more like community-based work in the refugee resettlement domain. And this third bullet here, especially in times of crisis, such as COVID-19 and climate change. So I'm doing this work in Michigan and Grand Rapids, and we are, talking to refugee groups there, Bhutanese also, and Congolese specifically. We've been doing that for the last couple of years. And then COVID hit, right, in March. We were engaged on the ground. And then it turns out that these groups are on the front lines of COVID-19 response. They have WhatsApp, they have the communication mechanisms, they have the translation. They were able to mobilize transportation to drive COVID kits, which includes masks and other PPEs, and also food to the different, like the people, they know where the older adults live. They were able to know where older adults live and where vulnerable health risks, people with vulnerable health risks live. And the health department and the resettlement agencies actually, sought their help in getting information out and reaching the community. So we COVID-19 and also climate change in terms of community-based response to disasters illustrates this need for interdependence between professional social workers and these grassroots groups. And just a little small point then that, or not small, but so then we call for like capacity building, organizational and leadership development, and access to resources for these groups. And not just as institutional assistance, but also sharing the epistemic knowledge or cultural dimensions of organizational life. So basically that means that we also learn from how they do things and their ways of knowing and doing, rather than kind of co-opting or changing them to look like professional services. And these are all mine, but there's other resources and you can email me. And thank you very much. And you can email me with any questions or also later in the Q&A.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the cultural interdependence or your topic, where you talked about the refugees and the types of the management with an excellent comparative study. Where you had a say the when, who, and where, policy analysis. Thank you so much, ma'am. The questions will be posted and you can answer it at the end of the session, ma'am. So now let's move to the last speaker of our session, that is Ms. Caitlin L. Rufus, the Director of the Office of Global activities and the adjunct clinical assistant professor of the University of Michigan School of Social Work. Her roles include being an administrator, lecturer on topics related to global social work practice and the social field. Ms. Caitlin has also done extensive work in the various countries with those who live in extreme poverty. This has strengthened her resolve to build positive, sustainable, and intentional collaboration among School of Social Work and institutions, training social workers to address global issues. We are honored to have you to share your expertise on global interdependence and social work education with us. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share a little bit about how global interdependence has impacted social work education here at the University of Michigan. So kind of a case study to show how this has impacted the work that is done at my university. But I think it's important to kind of start by framing that this week in the United States is International Education Week, which is sponsored jointly by the Department of State and the Department of Education, which I think speaks to this whole idea of interdependence, right? I think as a country, we're recognizing that within education, we really need to be focusing outside of just the US, getting students outside of the borders of the US to do exchange programs or international education experiences, but also recognizing the really richness that international students bring to our programs. And so just wanted to kind of highlight that because I think it's a nice coincidence with your event and what's going on here. So just a quick agenda of what I'll be covering. Again, I'm not an expert on kind of interdependence of social work education across the world, but I think it is helpful to see how this has kind of played out over the past 15 or so years at the University of Michigan. So I'll talk a little bit about internationalization at the University of Michigan specifically, and then how that led to the creation of the office that I'm now the director of. Some of the focuses of the work that we do, and then ultimately the launch of a new concentration in our curriculum for students this fall that really is focused on helping social workers understand the interdependence beyond the work that's just happening in the United States, but with things that are happening all around the world. So the Office of Global Activities is kind of the area that I understand and that I've worked in for the past 10 plus years, but I think it's important to kind of understand the context of internationalization and global engagement at my university in general, because I think it's a trend that we're seeing in institutions across the US, but around the world. So the University of Michigan really was, since the early, I'd say 2000s, having a more and more specific focus on in global engagement and kind of what that looks like within higher education. So some of the principles that were being worked from was that they wanted to improve student preparedness for a global society, recognizing that there is this interdependence going on around the world, focusing on internationalizing the curricula and programs, and then, of course, enhancing institutional international profile and reputation. You can read in there that they care about the rankings, right? And that to be able to be a high-ranked, public university in the U.S., you need to be collaborating with folks around the world. You can't just be focused in on the work that you're doing. And then just growing international access for partnerships, both for research and for teaching. So there was a focus both around what students are doing and kind of the teaching and experiential arena, but also for faculty about research and collaboration projects that they could do. And actually every 10 years in the United States, our programs go through accreditation to become a reaccredited university. And in 2010, the focus of that was largely on internationalization, both as what the commission was looking at in terms of what the university was doing, but also what the University of Michigan was highlighting. And so I think this is an important backdrop for how the creation of the office and the focus within our social work program started. So the dean of the School of Social Work at the time in 2007 started an Office of Global Activities. So previously there hadn't been one because of really, it was student demand and was supported by faculty interest and demand as well, was the reason for the office that it started. And a lot of that was because students, I actually have proposals that students wrote saying, we need to have an office, we need to have structures to support this. We need this not to be kind of an ad hoc add-on that the university is doing, but something that we're kind of specifically curating and offering for student experiences. And faculty were saying the same. They were noting that their research was taking more international, connections, that it was looking with a lens that was broader than just what was going on in the United States. And so in that kind of context, the office was started in 2007. And it was started with, the dean gave the office a few different charges. And so the first was to formalize the process for students to do a field placement or to do an independent study in another country. So really focused on helping get students outside of the US in formalized ways that they could receive credit for as a part of their degree. We are also charged with deepening partnerships with schools of social work in other countries. So starting university partnerships that were more formal as opposed to just kind of informal collaborations that had been going on. And then also, this was pretty broad, helping advise and guide the process of strengthening the global perspectives in the school. And as you can see, this one isn't necessarily academic focused, but pretty broad and wide open. And I'll talk a little bit about how that goal has kind of evolved as we've seen the need for more collaboration across issues that are cross-cutting for social workers. So given the charges that we had, the office really focused initially on experiential programming, offering students opportunities to engage globally. So not so much studying about it, but kind of living it, right? Getting on an airplane or having exchange students here that we were interacting with in the classroom. And so a few of the different kind of experiential offerings, we offered the opportunity for students to do global field placements abroad. So in our curriculum, about a quarter of the credits that a master's student receives is for doing their internship. And so we were setting up opportunities for students to do that overseas. We also had a large group of students that didn't necessarily want to do a field placement, but were interested in elective credits for studying something that they determined was of interest to them with a faculty member in some other country. And so we have 25 to 30 students that will do an independent study that they've really directed and driven and kind of set up. We also have a partnership with the United States Peace Corps, which allows students to be on campus for 2 semesters. Then they actually go off and serve in another country in Peace Corps for 2 years before they come back and finish the last couple semesters of their degree. So this is an extended program that also allows for substantial international engagement for these students. And then we've hosted exchange students and visiting scholars. The school has really hosted these folks long before this office was created, but our office was able to provide some more structure and some processes for them. And we're actually very excited. We will be welcoming Dr. Prince Solomon to be a visiting scholar with us in 2021. So always excited to have visiting scholars from our partner universities that are able to come. And in addition to some of this kind of really experience-based focus for students, we also did co-curricular events and workshops. We provided grants for faculty and PhD students for their research. We had more students coming to us asking for, how do I launch my global career, right? If I want to do international work after I graduate, can you provide me with support on how best to find those jobs or to position myself? And then I'll talk a little bit more about the next 2 on some of the following slides, but we started to do a little bit more in kind of the academic realm. So looking at what would a certificate of global social work look like? And then also a massive open online course that was launched as an initiative across campus. And so over the years, since 2007, we've developed 8 university partnerships with different colleges and universities across the world. And so you can see them listed here. Obviously partners with Madras Christian College, which, I think the official partnership was signed in 2016. I think we've been in communication and collaboration since a couple of years beyond that. But we have a good mix of places in different parts of the world. So we've got partners in Singapore, Norway, Chile, Australia, Israel, Hong Kong, and Zambia right now. And largely these partnerships were set up with the idea that there would be collaborations across the university. And for our side, primarily, we're interested in students being able to complete field internships overseas. And so partnering with these universities so that our students can have an international field placement. We also welcome many exchange students from these countries, and then I place them in our field placement sites in Ann Arbor and the local area. And so really the kind of driver for us was setting up student experiences because that's what we were kind of tasked with by our dean. But over time, we realized that these partnerships could be broader and they could reach a larger, they could have a larger purpose to connect faculty for research purposes, to have other types of collaborations going on. And simultaneously to all of this, students, I think, really appreciated the opportunity to have the experiences of going overseas, right? To experience social work firsthand as an intern or as an independent study student looking at a particular issue. But they were also saying to us, we need more academic content on these issues, right? So the content of our curriculum was very Western centric, very US centric, and students felt like they were having these opportunities to have these experiences and they didn't have kind of the academic pairing with coursework. And so the first place we started was by creating a global social work certificate, which really didn't add a lot to the curriculum, but kind of packaged what we already had in a way that would allow the student to pursue a certificate and kind of an additional credential for their resume. And so students were required to do a global field placement that could be overseas, but it could also be in the US, working with immigrant or refugee populations or on other global issues. They also were required to take 6 credits or 2 courses, at least one in the School of Social Work, and then they could take one outside the school. We have many students that take classes in public policy or public health, sometimes in the School of Nursing or the law school, that have a global focus. We also took a look at job descriptions for the types of jobs our students were interested in and noticed that many of them required language proficiency. So we added a language proficiency component to this certificate, as well as a 1-credit capstone that students would be in during their last year in the program so that they could kind of think about their experience that they'd had, how that prepares them for the career they want. So this was kind of our first step into a little bit more of the academic and coursework side of things beyond just the experiences. And I should say field is for academic credit, but I think some of the more kind of classroom-based work. But again, you can see we were just kind of taking what was already there and packaging it in a particular way. Another initiative that I want to mention that didn't necessarily have a global focus when we started was a massive open online course. So there were about 7 partners across campus that got together and decided we needed to provide some more content and preparation for students who are going to do community engagement work. And this could be community engagement work in the Ann Arbor or Ypsilanti area. It could be down the road in Detroit, Michigan, across the country. So maybe students going into New York City or going into Washington, DC, and then also our students that were going overseas. And so we felt that many students were very excited about doing community engagement, but weren't necessarily prepared and were potentially perpetuating harm. So we put together some content and worked with some of our on-campus collaborators who decided that this would be a good format. A MOOC or a massive open online course would be a great way to put this content. So again, this wasn't course credit bearing, but it was kind of more course focused. There were topics, there were modules, there were quizzes at the end, and then one could pursue a certificate. The MOOC is open, and so if any of you are interested in it, you can take it for free. And so I've included the link here. But what we found is that we actually ended up having learners from around the world. And so I think this was the data about a year after the MOOC had launched. So we've had many more learners since then. But we saw that about 1/3 of the learners were coming from the United States, but we had learners from almost 150 countries that were taking the MOOC. And you can see some of the top non-US countries where we had folks enrolling included Canada, Nigeria, Australia, Brazil, India, and Indonesia. And so we found that our students were having more collaborations through the chat functionalities, through the different discussion boards with folks not just in the US preparing to do engagement work, but folks from around the world. And so this was really another opportunity for us to make our students, help our students recognize the interdependence that we have with folks from around the world. And that leads us to the final thing that I want to talk about, and that's where we actually launched a curriculum that had a global focus. So previously, again, we had students that were having these experiences. We might have them, take the certificate, but we didn't have kind of an academic concentration or pathway for them to focus all of their studies or a majority of their studies on kind of global social work. And so as our faculty were looking to redo our curriculum, they started out by coming up with the guiding principles that they wanted to use. And I just put kind of the principle itself here, but with the 9th one, I added the kind of definition that they decided on. And so they wanted the curriculum to recognize the global dimension of social work, meaning that the curriculum prepares our students for work in an increasingly interdependent world by emphasizing international competency and collaboration. And so over the past 10 plus years, we've been starting partnerships with different universities. We've learned about different ways that we could collaborate with them for research, teaching, for field placements. But we realized that it was really time for us to launch a curriculum or a concentration focus on global social work. And so we reached out to our students, our alums, our faculty, field instructors, and other folks to decide what this global social work curriculum would look like. And we also noted that we wanted global social work not just to mean things outside of the US, but also things going on inside of the US that have that global focus. And so ultimately this past fall, we launched the Global Social Work Pathway, and I'll let you read with the focus of what that is and some of the kind of topics that it focuses on. But our students in this pathway complete 12 credits. There's 2 required courses that they take. Then they identify and select 1 practice methods or skills focused course and take 1 elective course, which could be a language course. It could be a course outside of the School of Social Work in the law school about immigration law. And so this is new for us this past year. And we actually, I think our pathway this fall was the 4th most popular out of the 8 pathways or concentrations offered for students. And so I think we see in the School of Social Work situation where I'm from about how this recognition of interdependence was really started by students. Students were the one asking for it. They were the ones kind of pushing the school to do it, and how we went from kind of experience-based to then academic-based, again, largely because of kind of student demand. And so now having this curriculum that's launched that'll allow students to really not just kind of get some of this here and there in a hodgepodge way, but to actually focus their curriculum and think about the interdependence of a lot of the social work grand challenges and the other places in which social workers intervene and do their work. So I hope that is helpful in kind of looking at what, interdependence, how it influences social work education with kind of a case study model.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for elaborating us with the deep details regarding the global interdependence with the beautiful examples of your institution. Thank you so much, ma'am. Now we enter into the question and answer session. Now I would like the speakers to answer the questions crisp as possible due to the time constraints. The first question is for Dr. Julie, ma'am. Dr. Julie.
Okay, hello. Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, hi, ma'am. The question is, what should be the balance between universal and local content in international social work?
Could you repeat the question?
The balance between
what is the
universal
balance?
and local content. What should be the balance between universal and local content in international social work?
Okay, that's an interesting question. As social workers, I think we need to think about what is the issue at hand. And so whether the intervention is taking place at a local level, at a community level, at a systems level, or in terms of those dimensions, whether it's local, global, international, I think is going to vary depending on the issue and perhaps the nature of the work that the person is engaging in. So I don't know how to answer the question in terms of balance, but I think it's important to think about a holistic approach and then looking to see where we might have an influence. And I would say that, as individuals, we can make a difference, but we can often have a greater impact if we're working collaboratively with others. And so I think this is where, when we think about solidarity, engaging in social movements and activism, creating those partnerships is an important part of the work, so that we can join our efforts together collectively to achieve a greater impact. And so, but the balance, I think, really depends on the issue and the topic and that context in which we're seeking to have an impact. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Thank you. So the next question is to Dr. Odisha. Ma'am. Ma'am, the question
Yes.
is, how successful was cost-benefit analysis in helping people in your area and the sustainability of your projects?
Yeah. Can you repeat that? Or
Yes, ma'am. How successful was cost-benefit analysis in helping people in your area and the sustainability of your projects?
cost benefit analysis in my area?
Yes, ma'am.
I think that's an interesting question. So yes, I think that, that's the kind of overarching like priority or ethos, and increasingly the overarching ethos and principle through that kind of is prioritized in social services nowadays, especially with like limited resources. And so cost benefit analysis is kind of the the typical assessment of services, but at the same time, there's, I think, more like person-centered approaches to assessment, or seeing the impact of our work that can, I guess, sometimes contradict the cost-benefit analysis. So, so there's a little bit of tension there, right? But in terms of, yeah, so analyzing refugee-run organizations and grassroots groups, well, at least in my specific research, we're not doing a cost-benefit analysis at this point, but it is definitely something very important and interesting to be able to like talk in the language and terms of what's a dominant understanding of efficiency and effectiveness. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, ma'am. Now the next question is to Dr. Jude. Sir had answered it on chat box, but we could just ask him to repeat it again so that the participants in the YouTube can get access to it. How can social workers curb impact of economic interdependence on the probability of conflict between worlds? So. Dr. Jude?
I don't think
You can-
he's there.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Sorry about that. I'm switching from work mode to webinar mode, so it took a little while. So what was the question? I know I answered it on the chat, but
Yes, sir.
the
How can social workers curb impact of economic interdependence on the probability of conflicts between worlds?
Yeah, there's there are various models which we could think, but at the same time, there's levels of involvement. At the international level, we would start with conflict resolution at the local level, at the national level, and international level. On the other hand, the social worker interested in working with organizations probably should take a higher role in terms of working with organizations at the international level, like the UN, UNESCO, various other bodies which contribute in a larger manner. I'm not sure that I answered the question, but hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Now the question is for Ms. Caitlin. Ma'am,
Yes.
how accessible are online courses such as the MOOC on community engagement? Will this be the future of social work in the face of future super virus and possible lockdowns?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. I think that MOOCs are a huge trend in education generally. But I think there's a lot of questions about the quality of the engagement and of what can be given through a MOOC. And so for us, we didn't want it to actually be academic course bearing, credit bearing, but rather content that folks could go through as they were interested. But I think, you know, when you look at the numbers, we've had something like 12,000 people enroll. But if they've completed all of the modules or not, we don't know. And I think the online environment is a challenging one. I think it's one we've been thrust into because of the pandemic. I don't think the trend is going away. I think many schools of social work are starting online programs now, and I think we're grappling with what that means for the quality of education and the preparedness of the folks that we are putting out there into the field. So I think it's a question that is going to be ongoing for years to come, and we'll be figuring out as a profession.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So thank you to all the speakers for taking time and sharing your views with us. It was an enlightening session with you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. We have come to the end of day 1 of the international webinar on growing global interdependence in international social work. Before we close, I want to thank all the speakers who has contributed today. I'm sure all the participants have learned something new. Participants kindly note that tomorrow's session will begin at 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Indian Standard Time.
84169.
Tomorrow, we'll be having interesting session, panel discussion, and we will also have Dr. Anna Maria, President of International Association of Schools of Social Work among us. Hope to see you all tomorrow. Please fill the attendance link that is shared in Zoom as well as YouTube chat box. In case your questions are not answered in the session, add them as well as and we'll get back to you. Thank you all. Have a good evening. Hope to see you guys tomorrow. Thank you all.
Thank you all so much for being here, Jude and Julie, Caitlin, Odis. Thank you so much for your time. I know it's early morning for you all, or quite early in the morning. So thank you so much. We really enjoyed the session.
Yes,
Thank you,
so
Miriam.
much.
It's lovely to see you again.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day. Yeah, bye-bye. Prince, thank you. Yeah.
Hi, Prince.
Hi,
Jemai.
Odis. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Hi, Caitlin. Thank you so much.
I'm just responding to one more question in the chat. So
Okay, please do that. Please do that.
Jemima, thank you. Good work.